Hello and welcome to session 345 in the AISafety.com reading group. Tonight we'll be discussing the article Teaching Claude Why by Jonathan Kutasov and other researchers at Anthropic. Before we begin with the article, I would like to bring up Eliezer Yudkowsky's original definition of alignment. He defined alignment as developing sufficiently advanced AI such that running them produces good outcomes. So this is fundamentally about ensuring that the internal values of the AI are either compatible or identical with the values of humanity. And to me, the operative word in this definition is sufficiently, which refers to the AI that has to be capable of producing catastrophic outcomes that weaker models cannot. So it's not really that meaningful to talk about the alignment of weak models. In practice, of course, reading Eliezer's work makes it very, very clear that the thing he's particularly focusing on is existential risk, AI takeovers, and other catastrophic scenarios. In this classic discussion of alignment, there is kind of an underlying assumption that the AI already perfectly knows what our intentions are. And it's also frequently assumed that the AI is super intelligent, though strict super intelligence isn't necessarily required in this threat model. Eliezer has frequently lamented that that alternative definitions of alignment have emerged, and that confuses the discourse and is kind of encroaching on the original meaning. So in this presentation, I want to be particularly clear about the terminology and definition of alignment that I'm using. So to refer to the kind of alignment that Anthropic does, I will use the term prosaic alignment, and they sometimes do so themselves. This is the behavioral modification of AIs that are not yet smart enough to independently deduce our true intentions. And I will rename Eliezer Yudkowsky's concept of alignment, and I'll do so based on my own working definition of AGI. Recall from previous sessions that I've defined AGI as an artificial intelligence that is capable of executing a successful takeover. I find that to be a highly useful and practical definition for evaluating existential risk scenarios. And therefore, throughout this presentation, I'll use the term AGI alignment to refer to Eliezer's classic definition. Outside of this presentation, I will still generally continue to use the base word alignment roughly in the same sense as Eliezer does. It is important to notice that prosaic alignment and AGI alignment do not clearly cover the entire spectrum of capabilities, because between these two concepts there lies a dangerous middle ground that is dealing with models at a middling level of capabilities. So those are AIs that are situationally aware enough to figure out our intentions, but they lack the actual power to take over. This specific capability overhang is the exact breeding ground for deceptively aligned AIs. I predict that as capabilities increase to this middling level, prosaic alignment will falsely appear to be working perfectly because the models will act deceptively. I further predict that the researchers that were relying on the prosaic techniques will conclude that their work is basically unneeded because the models seem to be behaving perfectly, even if this work is not done. So they'll just declare alignment solved by default. As Nick Bostrom outlined in his 2014 book Superintelligence, this scenario guarantees that we will eventually face highly capable AIs that are entirely without effective alignment guardrails and go into the whirling blades. Now, let's turn to the article Teaching Claude Why on the prosaic alignment efforts at Anthropic. The observed prosaic alignment failure that motivates this research is known as agentic misalignment. This concerns when AI systems are observed taking coherent and obviously harmful actions in an autonomous fashion. This behavior has been the topic of several previous studies by Anthropic. We've also discussed these in the reading group previously. Jonathan Kutuzov also hopes that this new training program will reduce jailbreaks and similar harmful attacks, prompting attacks, in addition to reducing agentic misalignment. So these are some kind of I will classify jailbreaks and prompting as adversarial misalignment attacks. But there's also a level of misalignment that's below this. This is like reward hacking, psychophancy, like dumb problems in a sense. But there is also, and this is crucial, a level above this, which is like strategic behaviors like sandbagging, alignment faking, outright sabotage, that kind of thing. I do appreciate that Anthropic is making public the methods that they use to improve prosaic alignment. This involves fine-tuning the models by training it on synthetic documents and chat transcripts. They're using evaluations for agentic misalignment, situational understanding, and several other metrics pretty broadly. Because the pre-training happened before the misalignment blog post was originally posted, Jonathan guarantees that the model is unaware of the evaluation scenarios. And I feel this is the kind of absolute guarantee that Anthropic cannot and realistically should not make. Because I can easily come up with many ways that the exact data could in fact have ended up in the training set. And the model could also become aware of the scenario organically through deduction or tool calls. And of course, if Claude is actually misaligned, then this would be an obvious target for sabotage, right? There's really strong incentives to actively make Jonathan's guarantee fail. There's a sense of hubris in this claim, especially since there is no indication that Anthropic has actually tested whether there is data contamination. Since we observe agentic misalignment, it's natural to formulate hypotheses as to why that occurs. And Jonathan Kutuzov lists a couple of hypotheses that he considers plausible for this behavior. But when I look at the list, I haven't reproduced the list here. When I look at the list, there is really surprising fact that the essential hypothesis is completely missing. Like agentic misalignment could in fact simply be caused by the AI being aligned to something unintended. Like Claude might, for instance, possess an internal utility function or something approximately like that, which it's optimizing towards, which it's aligned towards, and that could cause the observed behavior. On balance, I think this is unlikely today, but Anthropic or myself, we don't really have strong reasons to definitely rule that out. And it is striking to me how the central hypothesis that is basically underlying a lot of classical AI safety doesn't even make their list of hypotheses to consider. Instead, their accepted conclusion is that the cause is merely gaps in Claude's safety training material. This ultimately frames the issue as a capability problem, because Claude ought to be able to infer the developer's intent. Certainly, it will be able to do that if it continues to improve. So in a moment, we will turn to the results presented in the article. But I will not go over these specific methods and results in detail, because I don't think they are particularly central to AGI alignment. I suspect some in the reading group and elsewhere might disagree and see some connection more or less clear to AGI alignment. That would be great. So for this reason, I've asked Gemini to generate some summaries that we can use in the discussion. Unfortunately, the summaries are not really objective. It seems like Gemini is optimizing them for making like a summary that CERN approves of. So, caveat lector. First, Anthropic adds synthetic, prosaically aligned data to improve the pre-trained models. This pushes the models away from any priors in the space of science fiction stories about AI takeover. It seems to operate exclusively on the level of trying to ensure that the model adopts a certain persona, and it ought, in theory, to be possible to look at the prior in some principled way and try to like cancel that out with the fine-tuning, but it seems very much like something that is done ad hoc. The prosaic alignment-specific training data was improved in some qualitative sense, especially around explaining why we want certain behavior. And this seems to work very well. I can certainly see the improvement from the data, but it's hard for me to evaluate if that was because the previous quality was very, very bad and now it's normal, but it could also be that the quality has improved and currently it is really, really good. The article details work describing how Claude relates and is trained on its constitution. So this is a part that, while it's important for Anthropic, it might not translate directly to the other frontier AI corporations because they're not using constitutional AI. There's some more results on the generalization and persistence through reinforcement learning, as well as some an empirical basis now for the possibly common sense claim that diversity training helps with generalization. The results are really promising. The fine-tuning not only survives reinforcement learning, but seems to have a synergistic relationship with reinforcement learning. But I'm going to make a record scratch sound here, because that was actually unexpected. This is in fact a non-trivial claim, and this is a claim that goes against my predictions. So let's look at that in more details. So to explain why I found that claim confusing, like why is it confusing that fine-tuning persists through reinforcement learning, I need to start with my overall model of how reinforcement learning shapes the models. So first, we have like the base training, the pre-training, where the model is trained on everything everyone has ever written and ends up with something that is kind of like human imitation. So this isn't like a shotgun with a mask, this metaphor, because it's really nothing but masks at this stage. So the pre-training step is one that I imagine that Anthropic doesn't focus very much on, right? There isn't really that much more material on the web that can be scraped, and even if they do find a book that hasn't been indexed before, it will probably not be like a big update. Now, the second part of the model shaping process is prosaic alignment, like reinforcement learning from human feedback, that kind of fine-tuning. And in my model, the goal here is to make the AI model reliably select one particular mask, that of the helpful assistant. So here it becomes much more coherent, and this is really the classic shoggoth with a mask metaphor, right? We make it, we give it the smiling face. But this kind of fine-tuning doesn't really deeply change the model in any principled fashion. And partly this is because of lack of compute and lack of data. Like there's just a lot less fine-tuning data than there is of other data. And I would expect that Anthropic is not spending that much of their resources on this kind of training. But I obviously don't know, right? The third and last stage is reinforcement learning from verifiable rewards. And in practice, the thing we're talking about here is reinforcement learning on code correctness, code quality. At least that's my guess. And this this precise feedback and the really, really plentiful compute that is allocated to this stage makes the model much more capable and intelligent at stage 3. But reinforcement learning also pushes the model towards being coherent and consequentialist. My strong estimate is that this is where Anthropic is actually really using the researchers and actually putting in the majority, the supermajority of their compute. And that was really why I was so surprised to see reinforcement learning seemingly reinforce the second step of the process. That is strange, right? It could be that the model is just becoming smarter in general, more consequentialist, and so it learns to be deceptive in order to get reward. That would be one hypothesis. So I went back to actually read the text. And reading the text finally, it appears that the reinforcement learning that is done in this case is not the core reinforcement learning that Anthropic is doing, but some extra special reinforcement learning on a tiny environment that's specifically for harmlessness. So unfortunately, we don't really know if the persona persists through the real capability reinforcement learning that Anthropic does. So I'm really left with a sense of bait and switch. Like there's a promise that persistence of this alignment through reinforcement learning, but whether it actually persists through to what the user gets, to the model that's actually deployed, is not illuminated in any sense, as far as I can tell. The article concludes with a discussion of the limitations and the general applicability of the results. Most of this seems reasonable to me. I have a few comments, except on the last part about the generalization to larger models, because Jonathan have made these experiments on some very, very small models, but haven't seen evidence that this might not generalize. A priori, you would probably expect there to be some kind of change at least, right? The more capable models might benefit from different kinds of instruction. They can infer more things if they're more capable, almost by definition. I also somewhat question why Anthropic does not prioritize experiments on larger models. Why do they have to do these kind of experiments on small, old models? So I'll end this presentation with my overall sense of prosaic alignment research at Anthropic. There is an optimistic perspective on this research that I don't think should be neglected, because it's a priori it seems reasonable that there ought to be some kind of research overlap between prosaic and AGI alignment. Like we can observe with humans, for instance, that the way we learn about values and we internalize them at the same time. We adopt the values that we learn about. There's some kind of intrinsification process, as Bostrom calls it. And we can possibly learn how very weak models do this. Like they may in fact fail to distinguish between outward behavior and internal values. These models could also be useful for AI control. In general, there's many uses for very weak models that are strongly prosaic aligned. And then finally, we could search for some theoretical justifications for why these methods might actually work for AGI alignment. And this is something that they, in the last part about further work, the researchers do suggest. But I think there is a much more pessimistic perspective that I have to present tonight. And there is a sense that the work on prosaic alignment might actively obscure and hide real AGI alignment problems from our view. if nothing else, it can act as a massive distraction in terms of resources, compute, researcher attention. And an obvious failure mode would be that this kind of teaching Claude Y is simply teaching a deceptively aligned AI exactly how it can deceive us. So unfortunately, my final analysis of this paper doesn't really adopt the optimistic perspective. I find it's a serious red flag that Anthropic is not publishing explicit research on AGI development. And the framings and omissions in this paper seem to me evidence of either disdain or ignorance regarding AGI development in the prosaic alignment team at Anthropic. This concludes my presentation of Teaching Claude Y by Jonathan Kutasev and others.